My name is Zoe, I'm 31 years old, and I'm a forensic accountant who specializes in uncovering financial fraud, which makes it particularly ironic that it took me so long to recognize the emotional and financial manipulation happening in my own family. For 29 years, I watched my parents shower my younger sister Emma with financial support while treating my achievements like expensive inconveniences. But what happened at Emma's $50,000 designer wedding last spring didn't just expose their favoritism. It revealed the shocking truth about where all that wedding money actually came from. If you've ever been the overlooked child in your family, if you've watched your parents bend over backward for a sibling while dismissing your accomplishments, or if you've ever discovered that the people you trusted most were lying to your face about money, this story is going to resonate with you in ways that might be uncomfortable but ultimately healing. Let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding my family's dynamics is crucial to appreciating just how spectacular their downfall became. Growing up, I was what you might call the responsible child. While Emma was charming teachers and getting away with missing assignments, I was maintaining a 4.0 GPA and working part-time jobs to save for college. My parents, Linda and Robert, seemed to view my academic success as expected rather than celebrated. When I graduated as valedictorian, my dad's response was that he hoped all that studying hadn't made me socially awkward. When Emma barely graduated 2 years later, they threw her a party and bought her a car. The pattern continued through college. I earned academic scholarships that covered most of my tuition, worked 2 jobs to pay for living expenses, and graduated summa cum laude with my accounting degree. My parents attended my graduation but spent most of the reception talking about Emma's upcoming sophomore year and how expensive her sorority fees were. Emma, meanwhile, was at a state school with full parental funding, changing majors every semester and maintaining what she generously called a social focus. After college, I landed a position at a prestigious forensic accounting firm. The work was intense, investigating corporate fraud, untangling complex financial schemes, building cases that put white-collar criminals behind bars. My starting salary was $68,000, which felt like winning the lottery after years of ramen noodles and shared apartments. I bought a modest condo, started building my professional wardrobe, and began the slow process of establishing myself in a field where being young and female meant constantly proving my competence. Emma, by contrast, moved back home after college and worked a series of part-time retail jobs while living rent-free and pursuing what she called her artistic journey. My parents not only supported this arrangement, but actively encouraged it, talking about how important it was for creative souls to have space to explore their passions. When I suggested that maybe some structure might be beneficial, my mother told me that not everyone could be as naturally driven as I was, and that Emma needed more support to find her way. The first major crack in the family facade appeared when I started dating Marcus 3 years ago. Marcus is a pediatric surgeon, brilliant and kind, with this way of making me laugh even after the most exhausting days of tracing money through offshore accounts. When I brought him home for the first time, my parents were polite but distant. Later, my mother pulled me aside and asked if I was sure he wasn't just attracted to my financial stability. The suggestion that a successful, accomplished man might be using me for money was so absurd it took my breath away. But it also revealed something crucial about how my parents viewed my worth. They couldn't imagine someone loving me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. Emma, during this same period, was dating a series of what I can only describe as financially dependent men. Artists, musicians, entrepreneurs with big dreams and empty wallets. My parents welcomed each, one with open arms, praising Emma's ability to see people's potential and supporting her relationships with actual financial contributions. They bought groceries for boyfriends, covered rent when artistic ventures fell through, and even paid for a boyfriend's medical bills when he couldn't afford insurance. When Marcus proposed to me 18 months ago, I was over the moon. He'd planned this elaborate proposal during a weekend trip to Vermont, complete with a custom ring he'd designed himself. The ring wasn't enormous, a beautiful 1-carat diamond in a vintage setting that reflected my love of classic, timeless pieces. It cost him about $8,000, which I knew represented months of saving on his resident salary. I couldn't wait to share the news with my family. I drove straight to my parents' house after we got back, practically floating with happiness. My mother examined the ring with what I initially interpreted as careful attention, but now recognize as skeptical evaluation. My father's first question wasn't about the wedding plans or how happy I was, but about whether Marcus could really afford such an extravagant purchase on a resident's salary. The word extravagant hit me like a physical blow. $8,000. For an engagement ring, something I would wear every day for the rest of my life, something that symbolized a love I'd never thought I'd find, was extravagant. But when Emma announced 6 months later that she was engaged to Tyler, a struggling photographer she'd been dating for 8 months, my parents' response was entirely different. Tyler's proposal involved a ring that cost less than $1,500. But you would have thought he'd presented Emma with the crown jewels based on my parents' reaction. They immediately started planning an engagement party, discussing venue options for the wedding, and asking Emma about her dream dress. Within a week, they'd committed to paying for the entire wedding, with a budget that started at $30,000 and kept climbing. I tried to be supportive. I helped Emma with vendor research, attended dress shopping appointments, and listened to hours of detailed planning discussions. But each conversation felt like a small cut, especially when my parents would reference my own engagement dismissively. My mother developed a habit of describing my ring as practical rather than beautiful, and my father repeatedly made jokes about young doctors and their spending habits. The wedding planning consumed my family for nearly a year. My parents' initial $30,000 budget expanded to $40,000, then $50,000, as Emma's vision became increasingly elaborate. They hired a wedding planner who specialized in luxury events, booked a historic mansion venue, and flew in flowers from Ecuador. Emma's dress cost $4,000. Her photographer was flown in from California, and the menu featured imported ingredients that cost more per plate than most people spend on groceries in a week. During this same period, Marcus and I were planning our own much smaller wedding. We decided on a budget of $15,000, which we were paying for ourselves. We wanted something intimate and meaningful, a small ceremony at a local botanical garden, followed by dinner at a restaurant we loved. When I mentioned our plans to my parents, they nodded approvingly and commented on how sensible we were being. Sensible, the word my family used when they wanted to diminish something without being directly critical. My academic achievements were sensible, my career choice was sensible, my relationship was sensible, my engagement ring was sensible. Nothing I did was ever described as beautiful, exciting, or worthy of celebration. Just sensible. The real breaking point came 2 months before Emma's wedding. I'd been working on a particularly complex case involving a family-owned construction company where the patriarch had been skimming money from employee pension funds. The case required hundreds of hours of detailed financial analysis, but when we finally built an airtight case, the satisfaction was immense. This wasn't just about numbers. We'd protected the retirement security of 43 hardworking people. My firm decided to submit the case for consideration for the National Association of Certified Fraud Examiners Excellence in Investigation Award, one of the most prestigious recognitions in forensic accounting. When I found out I'd been selected as a finalist, I was thrilled. Only 5 cases nationwide receive this recognition each year, and at 31, I would be the youngest recipient in the award's history. I called my parents immediately to share the news. My mother listened politely and said she was sure it was quite an honor. My father asked if there was any monetary prize associated with the award. When I explained that it was about professional recognition and career advancement, he commented that hopefully it would lead to practical benefits eventually. That same week, Emma called to announce that she'd found the perfect wedding favor, custom-designed macarons from a French pastry chef in New York. The macarons would cost $12 per guest, adding nearly $3,000 to the wedding budget. My parents not only approved the expense immediately, but praised Emma's attention to detail and her commitment to creating a memorable experience for her guests. $3,000 for cookies that guests would eat in 30 seconds. But my career-defining professional recognition was just sensible. The award ceremony was scheduled for the same weekend as Emma's final dress fitting, and my parents chose to attend the fitting rather than my ceremony. They explained that the dress fitting was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, while award ceremonies were primarily networking events. I attended the ceremony alone, accepted the award alone, and celebrated afterward with Marcus and my colleagues while my family posted Instagram stories about Emma's perfect dress. That night, as I held my award and tried to process my family's absence, something shifted in my perception. For the first time, I started to see their behavior not as misguided preference, but as systematic emotional neglect. The patterns were undeniable when viewed objectively. Every achievement I earned was minimized, while every whim of Emma's was indulged. Emma's wedding day arrived on a perfect May morning. The historic mansion was transformed into something from a fairy tale, with cascading flowers, crystal chandeliers, and enough luxury to fund a small nonprofit for a year. I served as Emma's maid of honor, smiling through the preparations while internally calculating the cost of every detail. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. Emma looked stunning, Tyler seemed genuinely happy, and the setting was undeniably romantic. But during the reception, as I watched my parents beam with pride at the spectacle they'd funded, something inside me reached a breaking point. I was standing near the head table when I overheard a conversation that changed everything. My father was talking to his brother, my Uncle James, about the wedding expenses. James was commenting on how generous my parents were being, and my father was explaining their philosophy about investing in their children's happiness. Then, Uncle James asked about my own wedding plans, and my father's response made my blood freeze. He said that Marcus and I were being very sensible with our budget, and that they'd offered to help, but we'd insisted on paying for everything ourselves. He presented this as if it demonstrated our admirable independence, but I knew it was a complete lie. They had never offered to contribute a single dollar to our wedding. I excused myself and found a quiet corner to process what I just heard. My father hadn't just failed to support my wedding, he'd actively lied to family members to make himself look generous while portraying me as stubbornly self-reliant. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, rewriting history to make their neglect seem like respect for my independence. But the conversation I overheard next was the one that changed everything forever. I was in the mansion's library taking a moment to compose myself when I heard my mother and Emma's wedding planner discussing final payments. The wedding planner was expressing concern about a significant outstanding balance, and my mother was assuring her that the money would be transferred by Monday. Then my mother said something that made my forensic accountant instincts immediately alert. She mentioned that they'd had to be creative with funding sources, and that they hoped certain transfers wouldn't be noticed until after the honeymoon. The wedding planner laughed and said something about family finances being complicated, but I wasn't laughing. My mother's phrasing, creative funding sources, transfers that shouldn't be noticed. These were the exact phrases I heard from fraud suspects trying to justify questionable financial behavior. As someone who'd spent years investigating embezzlement and financial manipulation, I recognized the language of financial impropriety. That Monday, I did something that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. I used my professional resources to run a background check on my parents' financial situation. What I discovered made me physically nauseous. My parents had taken out a second mortgage on their home to fund Emma's wedding. They'd maxed out 3 credit cards. Most shocking of all, they'd borrowed $25,000 from my grandmother's estate funds, money that was supposed to be held in trust for all the grandchildren, including me. But the real bombshell was what I found when I dug deeper into the estate records. My grandmother had left explicit instructions that each grandchild should receive equal distributions from her estate. Over the past 5 years, Emma had received nearly $40,000 in what were recorded as educational and emergency expenses. I had received nothing because my parents had told the estate executor that I was financially stable and didn't need assistance. They had stolen from my inheritance to fund Emma's lifestyle and wedding. They had lied to family members about offering to help with my wedding. They had gaslighted me for years about being sensible while systematically redirecting family resources away from me. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything: financial, records, email communications with the estate executor, credit reports, mortgage documents. My forensic accounting training made me thorough in ways that a normal person wouldn't have been. By the time I was finished, I had built a case against my own parents that would have impressed a federal prosecutor. Armed with this evidence, I requested a family meeting. I told my parents I needed to discuss some important financial matters, and they agreed to meet at their house the following Sunday. I think they expected a conversation about my own wedding budget, or maybe a request for some small assistance. Instead, I arrived with a folder containing copies of every document I'd uncovered. I laid out the evidence methodically, the same way I'd present findings to a client: the second mortgage, the credit card debt, the unauthorized distributions from grandmother's estate, the lies to Uncle James and other family members. The room was completely silent as I walked through each piece of evidence. My mother went pale when I showed her the estate records. My father actually tried to deny the credit card information until I showed him printed statements with his name and signature. When I finished my presentation, I asked them directly why they had systematically stolen from my inheritance to fund Emma's wedding and lifestyle. I asked why they had lied to family members about offering to help with my wedding. I asked why everything I achieved was sensible, while everything Emma wanted was worthy of celebration. My mother's response was to accuse me of spying on them and violating their privacy. My father said that family finances were complicated and that I wouldn't understand their perspective. They tried to reframe their behavior as protecting Emma, who they claimed was more vulnerable and needed more support. I told them that as a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud, I understood their perspective perfectly. They had engaged in systematic financial manipulation and embezzlement from a family estate. In any other context, this would be criminal behavior. Then I delivered the ultimatum that I'd spent weeks preparing. They had 30 days to repay every cent they'd taken from my grandmother's estate, with interest. They had 60 days to publicly acknowledge to all family members that they had never offered to contribute to my wedding and had lied about our independence. They had 90 days to enter family counseling to address their systematic favoritism and emotional manipulation. If they failed to meet any of these conditions, I would report their theft from the estate to the appropriate authorities and share the complete financial documentation with every family member, including Uncle James and Emma. My father exploded. He accused me of being vindictive and using my professional skills to attack my own family. He said that successful people like me should be grateful for our advantages rather than petty about wedding expenses. He actually used the phrase emotional terrorism to describe my ultimatum. My mother took a different approach, crying and saying she never meant to hurt me. She claimed that they'd always been proud of my success, but hadn't wanted to interfere with my independence. She said that Emma needed more help because she wasn't as naturally capable as I was, but neither of them agreed to my conditions. Instead, they asked me to forget what I'd discovered and trust that they would handle the estate matters appropriately going forward. They wanted me to pretend I'd never uncovered their systematic theft and manipulation. I left that meeting knowing that my relationship with my parents was fundamentally changed forever. 2 days later, I sent a detailed letter to the estate executor, outlining the unauthorized distributions and requesting a full audit. I also sent copies of all financial documentation to Uncle James, along with a letter explaining the true circumstances of both Emma's wedding funding and my own wedding budget. The response was swift and dramatic. Uncle James called my parents within hours of receiving my letter, demanding explanations. Other family members started asking questions about the estate distributions. The estate executor initiated an official investigation and demanded immediate repayment of the misappropriated funds. My parents were forced to take out a personal loan to repay the estate money. They had to sell their car and take a second job to manage their credit card debt. Most humiliating for them, they had to admit to the entire extended family that they had lied about offering to help with my wedding. Emma was devastated when she learned that her dream wedding had been funded through theft and deception. She called me crying, saying she'd had no idea where the money was coming from and that she never would have agreed to such an elaborate wedding if she'd known the truth. She offered to help repay some of the money, even though she was legally not responsible for our parents' fraud. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, at the annual family Christmas gathering. My parents were noticeably subdued, still dealing with the financial and social consequences of their exposed behavior. Emma and Tyler were struggling with the knowledge that their wedding celebration had been built on stolen money. And me? I was wearing the gorgeous new diamond, earrings that Marcus had given me to celebrate my promotion to senior forensic accountant and the successful prosecution of the pension fund case. My starting salary at the new position was $135,000, more than my parents' combined income. Uncle James made a point of congratulating me on my professional achievements and thanking me for uncovering the estate irregularities. Other family members expressed amazement at my forensic skills and asked about my work with obvious respect and interest. For the first time in my life, I was seen by my extended family as competent and accomplished rather than just sensible. My parents tried to act normal, but their previous pattern of dismissing my achievements while celebrating Emma's every move had been permanently disrupted. Everyone now knew that their financial priorities had been based on favoritism rather than need, and that their public statements about supporting all their children equally had been lies. The aftermath of exposing my parents' financial fraud taught me several crucial lessons about family dynamics and self-worth. First, that systematic favoritism in families is often about the parents' emotional needs, rather than the children's actual requirements. My parents had enjoyed feeling needed by Emma in ways they never felt needed by me, and they'd confused, enabling her dependence with loving support. Second, I learned that gaslighting about family history is incredibly common in dysfunctional families. My parents had spent years rewriting reality to make their favoritism seem like reasonable responses to our different personalities and needs. Only by applying professional analytical skills to my own family situation was I able to see through their narrative manipulation. Most importantly, I discovered that enforcing boundaries with family members requires the same systematic approach as any other complex problem. Emotional appeals and family loyalty arguments are insufficient when dealing with people who have demonstrated consistent patterns of manipulation and deceit. Sometimes you have to treat family members like the white-collar criminals they've chosen to become. Today, 18 months after that devastating family meeting, my relationship with my parents remains strained but honest. They completed the required family counseling and have made efforts to acknowledge their previous favoritism. They attended my wedding last fall and contributed a modest amount to our reception costs, though by then Marcus and I no longer needed or particularly wanted their financial support. Emma and I have rebuilt our relationship on more honest foundations. She's working with a therapist to address her own dependence patterns and has started taking more responsibility for her financial situation. She understands now that our parents' enabling behavior wasn't actually loving support, but rather a form of emotional manipulation that prevented her from developing independence. My parents have learned that my professional skills aren't just a source of sensible income, but tools that can uncover financial fraud regardless of who commits it. They've also learned that my emotional intelligence and boundary-setting abilities are just as sophisticated as my analytical capabilities. The forensic accounting case that earned me the national award led to additional professional opportunities and speaking engagements. I now serve on the board of a nonprofit that helps families recover from financial elder abuse, work that connects directly to my personal experience with family financial manipulation. Marcus and I built the life we wanted without compromise or familial approval. Our wedding was intimate and meaningful. Our home reflects our values rather than our parents' expectations. And our financial decisions are based on our goals rather than other people's opinions of what's sensible. If you're dealing with family, favoritism, financial manipulation, or systematic emotional neglect, I want you to know that your perception of unfair treatment is likely accurate. Families that engage in these behaviors are often skilled at gaslighting their victims and rewriting history to justify their actions. Trust your instincts, document everything, and don't hesitate to enforce boundaries that protect your emotional and financial well-being. Your worth isn't determined by your family's treatment of you. Your achievements don't become less significant because they're dismissed or minimized by people who should celebrate them. And your right to equal treatment and respect doesn't disappear because you're financially successful or emotionally strong. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for dysfunctional family members is to refuse to enable their manipulation and force them to confront the consequences of their choices. Sometimes protecting yourself requires treating family members like the criminals they've chosen to become. Have you experienced financial favoritism or systematic manipulation in your own family? Have you ever had to use professional skills to investigate your own relatives? Share your stories in the comments below. This community understands the complexity of holding family members accountable while maintaining your own integrity. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more. Content about setting boundaries, recognizing manipulation, and building the life you deserve despite family dysfunction. Remember that healing from family trauma is possible, that your professional skills are valuable tools for protecting yourself, and that sometimes the most unexpected response to family betrayal is simple, systematic accountability. You are worthy of equal treatment, honest relationships, and family members who celebrate your successes rather than diminish them. Don't settle for sensible when you deserve extraordinary.